This episode is powered by Act Now Education. Go to www.actnoweducation.com for free comprehensive educational resources and opportunities for active duty, veterans, military spouses, and children.
And the team did something at halftime that changed my life. They brought some Fort Carson soldiers out to talk about military transition. And everything they were saying, it was like in this crowd of thousands, they were just talking to me. And It was one of those moments I could actually say I felt called to do something.
Warriors, fall in. It's time for formation. So today's guest truly doesn't need an introduction, but I'm going to give you one anyways because she has a very extensive career helping out the military community. And so far, in her own personal career, she's been an executive branch strategist. She's a very well-renowned consultant, executive coach, keynote speaker, and she's an author. She's been featured in many publications and presentations to include Forbes, Entrepreneur, Bloomberg, MSNBC, Google, and she's also served as a TEDx speaker. She's served as a veterani mentor, has served many of ours helping folks within our military community, and I'm very fortunate to have her again today with us on the Morning Formation. So I want to welcome Lida Citroen to the Morning Formation podcast today. Thank you for giving us your time.
Of course. Thank you for welcoming me back. Thank you.
Lida, it's truly an honor to have interviewed you early on in my podcasting career, and also it's been a true honor to have you in my network as well. And I've reached out to you several times for some help, and you've always came through with some of the best advice and some of the best connections as well. You've connected me with some folks out there like Caesar, who is an expert himself, So thank you for that. I really appreciate it.
Of course. Well, it's always wonderful when you can connect good people to good people because something magical will happen.
Indeed. Very much so. And when we talked the last time, we were, at the time we were going through a pandemic.
Right.
And since then, a lot has changed. Things have opened up. People have gone back to work. Mm-hmm. And so it's a pretty dynamic time. So coming out of the pandemic, so far, what have you seen as far as the community coming together and making it happen on the career transition or even the online reputation side of it?
Well, great question. I mean, I think during the pandemic, I know a lot of my coaching and mentoring calls with either active duty service members or veterans who had recently left the military had a panic tone to them, right? This has got to be a terrible time to find a job. Maybe I should go back in, re-enlist, re-up. And honestly, the timing couldn't have been better for somebody to come out of the military. Because if you think of, one of the greatest strengths that we have in someone who has served in the United States Armed Forces is the skills of resiliency and adaptability and dealing well under pressure, working in high stress, complex environments. And that's what we were facing during the pandemic. So my advice was always, this is the perfect time to be a veteran looking for work because the market needs you. Civilians like myself were running around going, what is this? This isn't what we studied in business school. This isn't what we're used to. Overcoming obstacles and adapting to change is not our DNA like it is somebody who has served. So the timing was really good. But now that we're on the other side, I think the culture has still maybe not caught up. If you think about, the military culture in the sense that there's still a lot of unknowns. What is remote work? What does a hybrid work environment mean? For a lot of men and women coming out of uniform today, they're looking for an environment that resembles something they may have had in the military. And a lot of work environments have changed drastically. So not only do they have to find something that interests them, that supports their lifestyles and their preferred and non-preferred goals, but it also has to fit their work style in a different way. And that kind of turned a lot of things on its end. So there's still a lot of flux and a lot of uncertainty, I think, for those coming out of uniform today. But I would still say that the timing is great. Our country's not, we're not riding high yet, and we're back to work. But the cultural shift of uncertainty and complexity and all of that unstable feeling still is a value add for veterans in this market.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. And over the years, I have seen people resign a career, what they thought was going to be the career, whether it be in the military or a civilian position that they had. And over the years, the folks that I have witnessed who have believed in themselves and their abilities and what they can do and what they can achieve, I've seen them over the years make it, not just make it, but kill it
Right.
as far as
Yeah.
what their goals are. What would you say to someone out there who is looking at possibly a career change, or whether that be getting out of the military, or maybe they're a veteran themselves or a military spouse who's looking at a career change, but they're sort of afraid of taking that dip and believing in themselves?
Well, we call that a pivot, right? So when somebody goes from one career or one focus or one area of concentration to something really different, a doctor who becomes a public speaker, a teacher who goes to law school and starts a new career, somebody coming out of the military, going into being an investment banker. Those are career pivots. And a couple things that you mentioned. First, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. Just because you know how to, work on a kilo, or how to operate, a heavy piece of equipment, doesn't mean that's what you want to do after you come out of uniform. And similarly, just because you want to do something doesn't necessarily mean you should, right? You might want to do something that, to get the skills and the certifications and qualifications, would put you 10, 15 years out, and you don't have that kind of runway in terms of, resources. So it's really a matter of balancing reality in your dreams. There's room for both, but sometimes we have to think about that a little bit differently. But to make a pivot, to turn your ship in a new direction, it is a fabulous experience. I mean, I went from 20 years in corporate to starting my own company. I'd never started a company before. I knew a lot about business, but I'd never started a company. I've worked with many clients who wake up one morning and say, what I'm doing just doesn't do it for me anymore. I make good money and I get on the cover of magazines, but my heart isn't in it any longer. That's typically when somebody says, I'm looking for something different. And thinking about, what do I need to live on? What is realistic? What is a dream that I can do in my part-time versus I'm going to put my career towards it? There's some hard questions to ask, but the piece most people don't think about, and what I love to focus on, are the reputation assets. So let's say you woke up tomorrow and decided you wanted to open a catering business, right? Well, hopefully we would hope you know how to cook, right? Maybe you want to do a food truck, right? Do you have a truck? But thinking about the reputation piece, you'd want to inventory who are the people who might be able to help you get in front of investors, or help you get introduced to different culinary experts, or people who could provide help navigating the permitting process, or whatever. But you would look at your network and figure out who are the people that that are valuable to know in this new career. And similarly, there are going to be some people who fall out of that, right? So if you went from being a podcaster to running a catering business, maybe some of your podcast guests that you've stayed in touch with aren't as important from a career standpoint going forward. You'd make a choice to sort of move them off to the side a little bit and focus on the ones who do. So reputationally, we have to think about what is our equity in this new career. You'd be able to leverage a lot of the skills. You're a people person. You're outgoing. You're well known. You have a recognizable name. These are assets that you could use to run a catering business. You see what I'm saying? And people don't think about that. They just think about, okay, I'm tired of this. I'll just completely shift over here and I'll just leave everything behind. But there's so much you want to be able to bring with you. It's just not everything. Not every part of what you've done before comes across. And thinking about that strategically helps you to make a really smart decision.
Yeah. It's important to do your homework and your research for that important pivot, no doubt about it. And some of the folks that I've known that have made those pivots before have done just that, whether their research was in a business plan or they were involved in networking or connecting with folks that could help with that pivot is extremely important. And I wanted to talk about social media because when you're talking about networking and you're talking about connecting and you're talking about doing a potential pivot, how important is it to be out there on social media and to embrace it? And how much of a violation is it to not be on professional social media accounts such as LinkedIn?
I anytime I speak on the topic of online digital capital, reputation management, and social, I always ask, is there anyone in the room who is not on any social platform? Usually there's one or two little shy hands that go up in the back, right? And my next question is that job or career specific, right? Because if you're doing some type of covert work or you're in a position where being found is a risk, I completely get it, right? You have a certain level of security clearance or your employer says, we don't want people to know what your face looks like and what you're involved in. I totally get it. That is a very small fraction of the population that works in those jobs. So for most people, the reason that they would sheepishly raise their hand is they don't understand social media. They think it's a waste of time because they don't understand social media, or they don't know how to do it. The world we live in today is as soon as I get a name, somebody mentions I should know this guy KP, or I should look this person up. The first thing I'm going to do is either go to Google or go to LinkedIn, and I'm going to type the name in because I want to see what comes up. Now, if I go to Google, it's sort of it's a guess what shows up because you might have a common name. There might be somebody else who's famous that has your same name, or there could be a variety of reasons it's not as specific. But if I go to LinkedIn, what I'm going to see on LinkedIn is exactly what you want me to see. I'm going to see the kinds of pictures you want me to see about you. I'm going to learn about your background because I'm learning what you've told me. Nothing goes onto LinkedIn unless you put it there. So if you think about the level of control that you have, it's unbelievable. It is a huge search engine. So, thinking about it like a little micro website, you're putting information out there. It gives you the prompts, right? Describe your experience. Tell us about you. What volunteer activities are you involved in? Who are people that can vouch for you? But you're populating the information. Nothing goes on LinkedIn that you haven't approved. Even a recommendation doesn't get posted before you approve it. So it's a huge missed opportunity to not be found there. And again, there can be a small percentage of people who do it for strategic career reasons that I mentioned before. But for most people, understanding the level of control that you have and the opportunity to put information out there to start a conversation, it's amazing and it's valuable. I love when somebody starts a brand new conversation with me and says, so I see that you grew up in this area, or I see that you went to the school, or I understand that you write for this publication, because I know where they got it. They didn't get that level of detail on my website. They got that on LinkedIn. And I put it there so they would have a conversation starter. Maybe we grew up in the same area. Maybe we know some of the same people. Maybe we're passionate about the same topics. That's why I put the information on LinkedIn. So, is it a safe place? Yeah, it's a heck of a lot safer than Twitter or Instagram, TikTok, any of the ones that are more casual and relaxed, because a lot can happen when people get casual and relaxed. LinkedIn is more buttoned up. It's more professional. So there's an element of professional decorum that happens on LinkedIn, which makes it a safer place if somebody's going to venture onto social media for them to become active.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. There is a huge difference between Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, because I have tried my content. I've done like one short video, and I'll post that on multiple platforms. And I noticed that LinkedIn doesn't necessarily embrace the type of content that you put on Instagram, for example. So
totally
you got to be real careful. Totally different.
And you never should. I mean, whenever somebody tells me they just repurpose the same thing on all platforms, that's not the point, because your Instagram followers are looking for a very different experience. Facebook is a completely different environment. LinkedIn should have something professional. So if you're cross-purposing without modification, you're missing the whole point. It's not about reach, it's about engagement, it's about connection and having specific goals. In fact, I wrote an article today about having specific strategies for online positioning, right? What is your goal? If you're a job seeker, it's probably to attract recruiters and hiring managers in the companies you want to work for. If you're building your visibility and reputation, it's brand building. But have a goal for why you're on social media. Understand who your audience is. Who are you trying to get the attention of? And then where do those people hang out? Because if you're trying to find a job and you're spending all your time on Instagram, most recruiters and hiring managers are not looking for candidates on Instagram, but they are looking for them on LinkedIn. So think about it logically. It's a lot of time to spend on social media and not to have any type of strategy or objectives.
Yeah. And I did a reel on that not too long ago on Instagram where I was talking about wasting my time, just scrolling on TikTok and then, an hour later, looking back and being like, what did I accomplish in the last hour? Nothing. So you want to be directional and you want to be intentful when it comes to some of the things that you do online and purposeful, which I think is the underline of exactly what you just said, being purposeful in everything you do. And for those folks out there listening who refuse to go online, refuse to create a social platform, especially on things like LinkedIn, think back to when the internet was first created. A lot of people out there thought that the internet was a fad and it was going to go away. All right. The social media,
it's not going away.
It's not going away.
No.
It's getting bigger.
Yeah.
All right. And it's going to change. So you might as well embrace it. I had a conversation with someone today. It was a real estate agent. And he was interested in growing his Instagram. And I looked at his Instagram account and it had a whole bunch of generic still pictures on it. And I was trying to explain to him the differences between reels, stories versus posts. And I could tell that I wasn't quite getting through to him and it was going to be a steep learning curve. There's no better time to start than now if you don't know how to use these social media platforms out there. But Lida, before I jump into talking about the military-specific questions, for those of you out there who are just now listening to Lida for the very first time, I'd like for you, Lida, to talk about why you sort of positioned yourself to help out our military veterans. Because I know you for a number of years you were helping out large corporations, large companies. But take us back to that time where you had that situation. I think it was at a Denver Broncos game, right?
Yes, it was November 9, 2009. To set it up, when I started my company in 2008, right in the middle of the worst economy we had seen to date at that point, I knew that I wanted to carve out a place to give back. I didn't know what that was going to look like. I'd always served on boards of directors when I had been in corporate, but I didn't know what giving back as my own company was going to look like. So I just kind of created space for that and kept my eyes open. And I know that's why on November 9, 2009, when I got invited to a Denver Broncos football game, it was not a pretty game. We got completely obliterated. But it happened to be the week of Veterans Day. And the team did something at halftime that changed my life. They brought some Fort Carson soldiers out to talk about military transition. Okay, Pete, normally I don't pay attention at halftime unless it's a Super Bowl, right? But I was fixated to what they were talking about. And they talked about how do you sell yourself to a civilian employer when all you've known is the military culture and language and community? How do you figure out what comes next when you've been in this very prescriptive and standardized culture? And everything they were saying, it was like in this crowd of thousands, they were just talking to me. And It was one of those moments I can actually say I felt called to do something. And I looked at my husband in the moment and I said, oh my gosh, I could help here. This is what I do. What they're talking about is positioning and reputation management and personal branding. And my husband looked at me and he's like, honey, what do you know about the military? No offense, but I didn't know anyone in the military. I didn't have any friends or family members who'd served. So he had a little bit of a point, but this was something I was leaning into. My mother was raised in communist Hungary. Both of my parents were immigrants to this country. But communist Hungary was a very different environment when my mother was raised. And when she got to this country and saw what freedom was, she raised my brother and I with the message that if you ever get a chance to say thank you, freedom doesn't come for free. Someone paid a price. She says, you say thank you. And that was always in the back of my mind. So that combined with this message I heard, I was fixed on it. It was not an easy path, and I'm certainly not complaining because yours was much, much harder than mine. But there's a lot of resistance to civilians who just want to help. And I knocked on a lot of doors trying to just offer my programs, offer my coaching, my training, the work that I do and get paid by corporations. Couldn't I give this to veterans? And a lot of people said, yeah, what's in it for you? And it's legitimate, right? There are people who take advantage of the military space. But once that door did get opened for me and I started teaching these programs and coaching and mentoring and writing books and writing articles and speaking all over the country and paying my own way to go, I realized this isn't just something I can do. It's something I have to do. And 12 years later, I'm grateful that I get to still do it.
Yeah, the military community is not an easy community to break into.
It's pretty secure.
Even if you're a veteran yourself, because when you're in service, most military bases will have the used car lot, the tattoo parlors, everything you can imagine just off base, because everybody knows how much you make based off of what's on your collar. So it's like, well, what's in it for you? So over the years, Lida, you've definitely established yourself as an authentic supporter of our community, and that has been shown through the countless hours that you've volunteered through Veterati, and I know you have connections with V2I, Act Now Education, so many tremendous nonprofit organizations out there who are also interested in helping our community, and you have our utmost respect, and you have a solid reputation within our community. That's why I have you on the podcast today. So as far as what you've seen recently with experiences between female veterans and male veterans who are transitioning out, can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. And, honestly, I never knew that there would be really that much of a difference. Again, I'm civilian. My only context for understanding the military when I first started doing trainings and going to military installations is television and movies, right? That's what I thought the military was. I mean, you don't, I guess, all walk around like Tom Cruise in Top Gun. I don't know.
Right.
But I also thought that men and women served alongside in every situation. And I remember years ago speaking in, I think it was probably a group of around 50 to 100. They were active duty service members getting ready to exit the military. And I was talking and doing my program, and somebody said, ma'am, ask a question to the audience. And I was like, what's the question? He said, ask how many of the individuals in this room have worked alongside women. And in that moment, as he asked that, I realized the room was men. It never occurred to me it was only men. So I asked the question, and not a lot of hands went up. And that was really interesting because, again, my perspective, what I knew from television and movies was everybody's working alongside everybody. And I realized that's not necessarily the case, which means that the men coming into the workforce who might suddenly, maybe they have 20 years of experience from the military and now they're reporting to a 25-year-old manager, female, that's different. That's going to be really different to take orders, right? That dynamic is different. But female veterans, there's a whole situation that surrounds them. We see the numbers of self-identification much lower for female veterans than for their male counterparts. A lot of female veterans don't identify because of some of the stigma or unconscious bias that civilians bring. Many of my female veteran friends have said very often they'll walk out to their car in the parking lot and it'll say Air Force veteran as a bumper sticker. And people will look at her husband and say, thank you for your service. And he's like, yeah, I didn't serve, she did. Very common, right? So there's not a lot of self-identification, which is not good. We need women to self-identify if they feel like they want to do that. the biases and the stereotypes and the preconceived ideas around what a female veteran is have to change and shift, because the contribution that these women that have been in that environment, been in that culture, and learned those skills and shaped that character is so needed. Whether it's entrepreneurship, education, or in the workforce, it is so needed, and it's not as easy to get as you might think.
Yeah, that's actually fascinating. You've done a lot of presentations and things like that all across the United States. And have you had a chance to go into any bases overseas and have these type of presentations?
Man, I would love to. I haven't. I've had service members send me pictures of them holding my book in Afghanistan, or or different bases. Not Afghanistan today, but back then. And no,
Right.
I haven't had that opportunity. But boy, I'd be on board for that, because it is really cool. What's also interesting about the overseas piece is a lot of other countries have reached out to me. I have done some consulting, very small consulting with Canadian Air Force, the UK Royal Air Force out of the UK, Australia, India. Like, they're all kind of looking at what the Americans are doing and saying, how can we take care of our returning veterans and find opportunities to bring them into the fold the way the US is doing. So that's a really good sign.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, you've got literally global outreach, Lida, and that's absolutely fascinating. And just going back and touching on the female versus male veterans, I've over the span of the last year and a half spoke to She Vets It, Althea, and a number of other influencers out there who were in that situation where they served, but their husbands or spouses didn't serve, and so they've talked about that over the years, where their husbands get thanked for their service, and it's like, well, he didn't serve, I served. So
well,
that's a very
I did a program this summer with Purdue University. They have a concentrated effort to focus on women veterans, female veterans, and got to hear just some amazing sort of behind the scenes reality. And one of the things I think that women struggle with coming out of the military is still wanting to be feminine, still wanting to be a female, rather than having to be a man now going into an environment. And how do you navigate all that? And can you wear makeup? Yes, you can wear makeup. Can you wear high heels? Yes, you can wear high heels, but you don't have to. Like, what are the rules, and what has changed, and how does that dynamic work outside of the military, where everything is spelled out so clearly? And there's nothing spelled out, nothing is uniform, nothing is consistent across the civilian sector. So I think that was really an interesting revelation, that, we just still want to be who we are, and whatever that looks like, right? Whatever population you align with, being true to yourself, being authentic is really the name of the game. And that isn't something the military talks about, which that makes sense. That's not the military's job.
Yeah, no, most definitely. And what did you mention that was? It was a Purdue
Purdue
convention?
University does a focus fellowship, and they brought me out to speak. And this was, Marina was there, who you and I both know,
Yes.
and just an amazing group of female veterans who were pursuing their next career through the school. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you for stepping up and being part of that conversation, because you definitely bring a lot of value to that as well. You've heard countless stories, just being a mentor through Veterati, and I know that you've been through a number of different presentations, whether it be at the Air Force Academy or a lot of bases that you've been to, talking to our veterans and our service members as well. And I know that you've been heavily involved with entrepreneurship coaching for our veterans. So would you mind talking a little bit about that?
Oh, the brave few that are willing to become an entrepreneur. It's an interesting path, right? Because there's a lot of different reasons somebody decides to pursue business ownership, self-employment. And for some, it's, coming out of the military, I don't want to report to anyone. I don't want to be beholden to the man, whatever it is. For others, it's an idea they've had that they want to pursue and find their dream. And for others, it might be a franchise opportunity, and they just want the flexibility and the freedom of business ownership, but they don't want to come up with something their own. So there's a lot of different reasons that people pursue entrepreneurship. And what's so cool is that the statistics show how well suited veterans are to be entrepreneurs. It's some of the things we talked about earlier, being comfortable with change, being adaptable and flexible and resilient, tenacious and disciplined. All of those skills, which if you have those skills and you're an entrepreneur, like, you're golden, right? Because most entrepreneurs don't have that. They just want free income or want the freedom to do whatever they want. So veterans are very well set up for it. But entrepreneurship it's not a linear path. I describe it. I had a Veterati coaching call today, and I described it to this woman, Army soldier. I said, it's like free falling. I mean, you're constantly free falling, and you got to be okay with that, And I wasn't a risk taker, so I never wanted to be an entrepreneur. It was never my dream. I wasn't this little girl who wanted to own her own company, because I liked a paycheck every 2 weeks. I liked PTO and an office that had my name on it, but it became the most obvious thing when it became the most obvious thing. So I think you're either kind of cut out for it, or you learn to be cut out for it. Because if you're not a risk taker, you got to be okay with that idea of uncertainty, the free falling. Right? I have people who are dependent on me. I have, team members. And if I don't do my job and bring in work and get the work done, they don't feed their families. So there's all these layers of complexity. You have to have a viable business idea. You have to have runway in terms of resources and have really good allies in your corner who you can call upon for advice and legal counsel, insurance, accounting, all these unpleasant things that we have to deal with as business owners. But again, that's where veterans are set up better than civilians for it. Where the veteran may not be as versed is things like networking and the relationship building part of entrepreneurship, because most of us don't build our business in a silo, right? We need other people. We need those resources. We need referrals. We need, online connections and people to talk about our product or service or company. So having a really good network, having a really good narrative, the way that you talk about yourself, right? I don't lead with personal branding when I'm meeting somebody for the first time, because most people don't use that language. So I talk about, being clear about who you are and what you can offer and how your reputation advances your career as opposed to holds you back. That stuff people understand. Then I introduce the fact that I have a business. So having a really good elevator pitch and narrative is important, and being confident in who you are and what you can offer, because there's a lot of haters out there, and there's a lot of people who are, going to watch and take whatever you leave on the table. So you've got to be pretty confident and be able to sell yourself. And some of those are traits that veterans have to learn, as opposed to just inherently bring into entrepreneurship.
Yeah, that is very well said, Lida. And, two of the things that I really have over the last year have kind of come to realize is that a lot of veterans tend to be very stubborn. And I don't know if you have experienced this or not, but when it comes to networking, connecting, asking for help or asking for assistance, I know I was that way when I transitioned out. I thought, I got this. I'm going to get my postgraduate degree, and then I'm going to get out of the military. I know how to write a resume. I don't need TAPS. I don't need none of this stuff. And then I ended up having one position out of like 4 that was available. I had one position to choose from, and I had to choose that or go into unemployment, which I couldn't even fathom being a captain in 2003 going to unemployment. So I picked it, and I was part of the statistic that ended up leaving that job after my first year. So have you experienced that as well when it comes to the veteran community and the overall career transition?
Well, I mean, you hit on an easy one to start off with, and that is that asking for help is not something that is necessarily encouraged as much in the military as it is in the civilian space. We tell veterans, when you work with us, like asking for help is a sign of strength. You're not seen as less than or vulnerable or weak if you don't know how to do something you have no experience with, because a civilian wouldn't hesitate to find a resource, find some training, or ask for that. That is a little bit of a hesitancy when you have a veteran employee. I think the other thing, and maybe this ties back to what you were saying, is the idea of self-promotion, right? I mean, I think you can pretty much assume this far into the conversation, I have no trouble talking about myself, right? I have no trouble as a civilian listing off all my accomplishments and accolades and every success I've ever had. But the veteran has trouble with that. A veteran has trouble saying I, speaking in first person, taking credit, because service before self, the military value of service before self is that it's not about you, it's about those you serve alongside. And saying I, or implying that you're taking credit, feels like betrayal to those you served alongside. And I completely understand that. I think it is one of the most admirable traits the military teaches. But it's tough when somebody comes out of that environment and then tries to compete for opportunities in a culture where we have no trouble talking about ourselves, and we can even do it so confidently it doesn't even sound like bragging. How do you move from we to I in a way that's authentic and valuable? And that kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, that this isn't about being somebody you're not, or trying to reinvent yourself. It's about reaching in and finding those best pieces of you and bringing those forward. And that's something that somebody who has worn our nation's cloth has not been focused on. They've been focused on serving the nation and protecting us and allowing me to sleep at night, not worried about my freedom tomorrow. But if you can think about, who you are and what matters to you and what drives you and what you're passionate about and what your dreams are, what do you hope to do that's meaningful when you come out of uniform, then gradually you can get more comfortable talking about what you can contribute and what you can offer and where you could add value, because it still feels like serving a mission. And the thing we know about veterans is that desire to serve, which is why you raised your hand in the first place. We don't have a draft in this country, so there's no obligation to join the military. Everybody volunteered, in recent years. That desire to serve does not stop when you take the uniform off. So finding ways to channel that, finding ways to mentor and be a partner and a collaborator with different communities is really where we see veterans thrive. And military spouses as well. A lot of the traits that I'm using for veterans map extremely close for military spouses. They just don't wear uniforms and get recognized the same way.
100%, 100%. The military spouses go through a lot of the same obstacles, all the same obstacles, not a lot, all the same obstacles that the service member goes through when it comes to having to get stationed somewhere that they're unfamiliar with getting stationed with, having to reset all those relationships all over again. Yeah. And they're truly the pillars that hold up the entire service member. So, so when we're talking about service members, we're talking universally about military spouses as well. And, I'm talking about career transition and everything. And Lida focuses specifically, on the personal brand and online reputation. And really has a lot of great information, fascinating information about our community, because she spent so much time, literally one-on-one conversations, helping our veteran community out. Lida, over the horizon, what's in store for you? And would you mind talking about some of the publications that you've done and who they would be geared towards?
To answer what's coming, I'll back up just a little bit. So when I wrote my first book for the military, I've written 3 in the military community. My first book in that sector is Your Next Mission, right? A personal branding guide for the military to civilian transition. That book came out, and yes, it was very widely received by active duty and prior military, and military spouses were buying it and leaving it on the nightstand for their partner to read. but a large percentage of books were bought up by employers. And that was fascinating to me because I didn't understand why a civilian at a company would be buying a book written for veterans. But and several of them told me after I inquired, they said, you're kind of a unicorn here. You're a civilian who figured out this workforce that we can't figure out. So they bought the book thinking it would be a great insight into what they're doing. So then I wrote a book for employers, which is more of a guidebook about terminology and lingo and acronyms and best practices if you're interviewing, hiring, and onboarding veterans. That book came out in 2017, and it's a quick and practical guide. I mean, that's literally what it is. Throw it in a briefcase, go to a job fair. You know what to ask and what not to ask. A few years later, I wrote Success After Service, which is really about finding your next career after the military. So unlike your next mission, it's less on the personal branding and much more on the blocking and tackling. What do you do if you're 24 months out? You just turned your papers in, but you've signed up for TAP, but you don't know what you're supposed to do for 24 months. What do you do if you've got 60 days? What do you do if it's tomorrow and you haven't done anything, right? How do you find a job?
Yes.
How do you choose a job? It's also the only book, Success After Service, I think is the only book that talks about the path to student veteranship, right? So becoming a student veteran. And it also includes a section on entrepreneurship because we know that those are three: employment, entrepreneurship, and education are three paths that veterans take. And that book is doing really well as a blocking and tackling. But my work with employers is really where I'm really excited. Some very, very large companies, household names, I've been able to work with to either stand up, amplify, or really kind of build out their veteran recruiting process, their in-house training for managers and employees who work alongside veterans. It falls under the diversity, equity, and inclusion umbrella, which is really important right now. So just having a lot of wonderful conversations with some amazing employers around the world, talking about the veteran workforce and how to really capture and commit to those team members. That's what I look forward to doing more of.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating that you bring that up as far as working with the employers, because I recently had an interview with Michael Pett, who is the liaison for Uber. Mm-hmm. And he brought up the whole point of us being just over 20 years from September 11th. Yeah. And that's really important because that was the kickoff of the Afghanistan and then shortly thereafter the Iraq War. So you have a lot of veterans that joined out of patriotism during that time and are now getting ready to retire. Mm-hmm. So places, certain companies like Uber are looking to build that bridge to fill that gap of meeting those military members halfway when it comes to bringing them onto their workforce. And I thought that was fascinating that you just mentioned that.
Yeah. I am also kind of hung up on the thing you mentioned earlier about speaking at international bases. So I'm kind of thinking I might put an intention out to the universe for that, because that sounds really fun too. But this isn't a business thing for me. I mean, I do, employers do pay me for services in that space, but I do this because it's a way to genuinely say thank you for everything that I have because of people like you. And I get rewarded tenfold for every hour, or book that I write. And it's a truly an honor to be able to have the credibility that you talked about and be able to give back in this way. And I think other civilians could look for equally as rewarding opportunities if they just dug a little bit deep.
Yeah, I know. It's an absolute honor to be speaking to someone, because even with me in this podcast, I'm not getting paid to do the podcast, but I put a lot of hours into it as well. But it's an honor to be speaking to someone, a titan like yourself, who is actually making big waves in our community. So thank you for giving us your time today. But I also wanted to give you an opportunity to mention any pieces of advice or anything that you want to mention that we didn't talk about in the podcast that you'd want to throw in here towards the end of the podcast or the end of the episode today.
A couple things come to mind. I mean, I think the first one I bring up a lot is transition isn't an event. Transitioning out of the military is not a day or a week of ceremonies and dinners and cocktail parties. it's a process. And for some people, that process takes years. For some, it is a couple months. But one person's experience is not exactly like the next person. And own and appreciate and honor your experience for what it is. You've got, experience in the past that got you to this point. What comes next is how it's supposed to be for you. You can't rush it. You can't try to, shape it any way that it's not supposed to be. So just understand, when people talk about transition, they often think that once you've done the transition, you're somehow done, right? Well, it can be years before you're fully transitioned. And I think the other thing is, and this is what I really try and teach when I do the personal branding workshops is, I get to enjoy a life of authenticity, and I know who I am, and I'm clear about my values and how I want to show up in this world and the legacy that I'm working towards. Somebody in the military doesn't think about that on a daily basis, right? You're thinking about much different things. But then when you come out of uniform, that's kind of what we expect you to bring into the conversation. And it might feel self-centered, it might feel self-focused, and it kind of is, right? We're talking about you. But who else deserves the opportunity to live a life of meaning and purpose and fulfillment better than somebody who served their country? So take that time. It's not self-indulgent to look inside before you look outside, and really ask yourself who you are and who you want to be, and find the people that are going to help you. There's so many resources out there, maybe too many. But you're a great resource. I'm a great resource. I encourage anybody to reach out. I'm very findable on social media or my website. You can always find a way to reach me, and let us help you, because this journey, we're all in this together, and we're stronger together. And I have more fun that way too. So do that.
You can't get more authentic than that, Lida. And for now that you mention it, being findable on social media, I'll make sure I put it down in the show notes.
Please.
Would you mind talking to the folks out there on how they can connect with you, if they'd like to follow up with any questions, or maybe follow you on any of your platforms?
Sure. So my website, Lida360.com, is where all the information about who I am is. I have a YouTube channel with a ton of videos, completely easy to download. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So I am a LinkedIn learning instructor. I have 8 courses that I teach different areas of reputation management and branding and military transition on LinkedIn. Definitely connect with me on LinkedIn. Send me a message. Instagram, Twitter. I'm on all of them. It's kind of my personality. So I love social media.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm on all of them as well. Some more predominant than others. But yeah, I have seen you a lot on LinkedIn, and you've been doing great as far as the courses and everything. And I'll make sure I also put your books down there in the show notes as well. So if you're watching this on YouTube, scroll down to the description. You'll find all of Lida's information on how to connect. If you're listening to this on the podcast, go down to the bottom of the podcast there, and in the show notes, you'll see how you can connect with Lida as well. And Lida, going back to what you mentioned earlier as far as allies, you were one of the first interviews that I had. You're a TEDx speaker.
Yeah.
Like I mentioned, you're a titan in the industry. And I remember back in the day when I interviewed you the first time, I was like really nervous and really like, oh, this is a big deal. Like, I've got Lida Citroen coming on. So I want to thank you for being part of my journey, and I want to thank you for being a great friend and a great connection for the Morning Formation podcast and myself. I couldn't do it without folks like you being in my corner and being my ally. So thank you for that. I really appreciate it.
Well, the feeling is mutual. Absolutely. I feel like I get as much from our professional relationship as hopefully I give. So that's wonderful to hear.
Most definitely. And for everyone else out there listening, make sure you connect with Lida. Make sure you check out her books as well. I was looking at my bookshelf over here because I didn't think about it, but I have your books over here. I should have brought them in as little visuals, but I completely forgot about it.
I have them on my phone, don't worry.
There they are. There they are. If you guys want to see what they look like, if you're watching this on YouTube, they're right behind her. There's the orange covered, and then there's the purple or bluish cover as well. as well as the two. What are the two top ones, Lida?
Your Next Mission is the white cover with the red, white, and blue. And then Reputation 360, which we released again this year. It was the first book I ever wrote in 2011, and I rewrote it and published it again this year. So that one skews much more to a younger audience. And then Control the Narrative, which is right here, is my pride and joy because it's everything I know about corporate and executive branding for individuals.
I have the two bottom ones. I'll have to check out the
cool.
the two top ones as well. But Lida, thank you for giving us your time today. I really appreciate it. And for everyone else out there listening to the Morning Formation, I want to thank you for giving us your time as well. I hope you enjoyed the conversation that Lida and I had today. And as always, I want you to stay tuned, stay focused, and stay motivated. Warriors, fall out. You've been listening to the Morning Formation Podcast. I hope you found today's materials helpful and of value to your current situation. You can connect with me on Instagram at _morning_formation_podcast, or you can connect with me via email at theformationpodcaster@gmail.com. Also, I would like to thank my partners at Act Now Education for their support. Authenticity, community, and trusted is what you can expect from all members of the Act Now Education team. You can link up with them today and learn about some new free educational resources on their Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, or at their website, actnoweducation.com. Whether today's show took you back to a nostalgic time or helped you think about tomorrow, thank you for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you again. Stay safe and stay motivated. Warriors, fall out.